Clara Reed stood before the glass skyscraper of Astor Capital, a towering monument to cold ambition and sharper profits. 70 stories tall, each floor glowed like a silent warning: if you don't belong, turn around. She tugged at the hem of her ash-gray blazer, a second-hand piece she'd picked up from a thrift shop on the outskirts of town. It was a bit too tight in the shoulders, and her scuffed flats squeaked with every step, like a quiet whisper. You don't belong here, Clara. But Clara didn't have time to be afraid. Today marked her first day as an intern at one of the country's most prestigious investment firms, and she had only one mission: learn, survive, and don't do anything stupid. As she pushed through the thick glass doors, the blast of cold air conditioning made her shiver. Employees in designer suits glided past her as though she were invisible, or worse, an unsightly smudge on a perfect surface. A blonde woman in a fitted red dress leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Who is she? Looks like she stepped out of a time machine." Clara tightened her grip on the slim folder in her hands. They don't need to like you. You just need to do well. The reception desk stretched like a runway, and the woman behind it looked as though she'd stepped off a fashion magazine cover. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Clara Reed, investment analysis intern." "Oh, you're the replacement. Company must really be desperate to take on fresh grads." She slid an ID badge across the counter. "Floor 61. Don't lose it. And don't wander." Clara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and stepped into the elevator. The others inside chatted about stocks, crypto, and yachts. Clara simply tucked herself into a corner. When the doors opened, she stepped into another world, all steel, glass, and the sterile gleam of power. There was no space here for hesitation, and Clara knew her fight had only just begun. Clara's workstation wasn't really a desk, more like a fold-out table wedged into the hallway outside the printer room on floor 61. Every time someone printed documents, the whole whiteboard behind her vibrated slightly. No window, no cabinet, no welcome. But Clara didn't care. What she cared about was the towering stack of papers placed in front of her, along with a curt note from her supervisor. "Analyze this merger agreement. No questions, just notes." Over 300 pages thick, it was a $4,700,000,000 0-cents merger between Astor Capital and a rising tech company named Nerovia. This wasn't intern work, this was senior analyst territory. But Clara didn't flinch. She started reading line by line, annotating each clause, highlighting every vague expression. To her, it was like a cerebral puzzle. Each clause a hidden mechanism, and her job was to find the one piece that didn't fit. Then she paused at clause 9.4c, a long-winded paragraph dripping with convoluted legal phrasing. It stated that post-merger, Nerovia would retain temporary management rights over their core data systems for 2 years. But at the very bottom, in smaller font, was a buried sentence. This right may be extended indefinitely should Nerovia demonstrate that internal technical conditions remain incomplete. Clara froze. "Indefinitely?" she echoed in her mind. She read it again, then a third time. She couldn't understand how such a clause had slipped through. If left unchecked, Nerovia could retain control of all customer data, the most valuable asset in the deal, without ever having to hand it over. And the term internal technical conditions had no legal definition. Clara glanced around. No one was watching. "I'm just an intern," she thought. "If I bring this up and I'm wrong, they'll laugh me out of the building." But what if she was right? What if this was a trap, hidden in plain sight? As a former university debate team captain, Clara knew the truth doesn't wait for certainty, and silence is complicity. She picked up her pen, circled the clause in red, and wrote beside it, "Potential high-risk clause, reevaluate." Her heart pounded as she saved the file, part of her thought to include it in tomorrow's morning report. But another part, the braver part, whispered, "Speak now, before it's too late." Clara stood outside the conference room on the 66th floor, clutching her annotated folder like a shield. Her mind raced. half afraid she was about to embarrass herself, half convinced she couldn't stay silent. The door opened. She stepped into a room glowing with polished light. Around the long mahogany table sat directors, senior analysts, and legal leads. On the screen, the merger logo, Astor Capital and Nerovia. At the head of the table sat Marcus Wynn, the CEO. His gaze was colder than the air conditioning. Clara's manager, Miss Linton, leaned toward her and whispered, "Just take notes. Don't say a word." Clara nodded, but her conscience refused to stay quiet. When the presentation reached the data retention section, Richard Hale, head of legal, spoke smoothly. "All clauses have been thoroughly vetted. Clause 9.4c is merely procedural." Clara raised her head. She couldn't let this go. "Excuse me," she said, her voice small but firm. All eyes turned toward her. Marcus looked up. Silence gripped the room. "I believe Clause 9.4c poses a risk. The last sentence allows Nerovia to retain control over core data indefinitely if they cite incomplete internal technical conditions. But that term isn't defined anywhere." One director snorted. "And you are?" Clara stood, trying to stay composed. "Clara Reed, investment analysis intern." A few soft chuckles rippled through the room. Richard Hale exhaled deeply. "An intern? Claiming she sees more than our legal team?" Clara flushed, but stood her ground. "I'm not questioning the team. I just think the clause could be exploited and should be reviewed." Marcus's eyes locked onto hers, unreadable. Then, after a long pause, his voice cut the silence. "Are you finished?" Clara swallowed. "Yes, sir." "Leave the room." She gathered her papers and walked out under a wave of annoyed glances and subtle headshakes. The moment the door shut, laughter resumed. That afternoon, Clara ate her lunch alone at her desk. Greg, a mid-level associate who once dubbed her the second-hand girl, leaned on her cubicle with a smirk. "So, I hear you just lectured the board on ethics?" Clara said nothing. Greg chuckled. "You're just an intern, Reed. This is Astor Capital, not your college debate club." As he walked away, Clara stared at her screen, biting back the humiliation. She reopened Clause 9.4c and whispered to herself, "I know I'm right." The next morning, Clara arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to quietly slip back into her routine, pretending that yesterday's boardroom scene had never happened. But as soon as she opened her laptop, an email notification froze her in place. A summons to meet with CEO Marcus Wynn at 9:00 a.m. No reason, no context. Just one cold instruction: do not be late. Floor 70 was a different world, a place only the powerful dared to enter. Clara straightened the collar of her thrifted blazer, hiding the slight tremble in her hands, and stepped into the elevator with her heart pounding against her ribs. When the doors opened, the hallway before her looked like a courtroom designed by architects of power. The soft gray carpet, the glow from skylights above, the silence, everything whispered judgment. The CEO's assistant led her into a small private boardroom. Marcus Wynn was already seated, spine straight, hands folded on a folder as pristine as the man himself. He didn't invite her to sit. "Miss Reed," he began, voice calm but edged like steel. "Do you often interrupt heads of legal during executive board meetings, or was yesterday just a creative outburst?" Clara stood firm, though her heartbeat thundered. "I didn't speak out of impulse, sir. I did it because I believed that clause could seriously endanger the company. And if I see something dangerous and stay silent, that would be the real mistake." Marcus tilted his head, analyzing her like a clause buried too deep in a contract. "You think you spotted something our legal team missed after 3 months of work?" "No, sir," Clara answered carefully. "I don't believe I know more than them. But maybe because I'm an outsider, I'm not blinded by routine. I couldn't pretend I didn't see it." He leaned back slightly, arms crossed. "You're bold, Reed. Either you're exceptionally clever or dangerously arrogant. Both can get people in trouble." The tension in the room was sharp enough to slice. Clara waited for the verdict. Then Marcus continued, voice cool and deliberate. You have 48 hours. Write me a full analysis of Clause 9.4c. If you're right, you stay. If not, I'll sign your dismissal myself. Clara drew a breath. Understood, sir. Before she turned to leave, he added one last sentence, clipped, final. Don't waste my time. As the door clicked shut behind her, Clara walked out with her pulse pounding, her chest tight from adrenaline. But for the first time since she stepped into Astor Capital, she felt something unexpected. A chance at evening, the 61st floor office felt abandoned, as if all signs of life had moved upward. The weak fluorescent lights cast a pale glow on Clara, still hunched over her tiny desk near the copy machine, a corner most people forgot even existed. But to Clara, it wasn't just a desk. It was a battleground. In front of her, nearly 300 pages of the merger agreement. Beside her, 3 highlighters, a well-worn notebook, a half-cold thermos of coffee, and a fragile thread of hope that she still had a chance. She started from page 1, not just rereading Clause 9.4c, but tracing every connected term, technical appendices, reference documents, data governance policies. She built cross-references, compiled vague terms into comparison charts, and dissected every phrase like a surgeon exposing hidden disease. 2 o'clock. She paused, stretching, pressing her fingers against her temples. Her eyes were burning, but her thoughts were sharp. Logic circuits lit up in her mind, connecting threads of meaning. A tiny footnote in one of the annexes caught her eye. Definition of technical conditions delegated to Norovia. Clara frowned. She traced it to an obscure appendix on page 337, where it stated that Norovia could self-define technical completion based on internal criteria, with no requirement for third-party validation. She understood. This wasn't just a loophole. It was a wide-open door for manipulati. Clara began typing. She opened a blank document, entitled it Contract Risk Analysis, Clause 9.4c and its implications on data ownership. The report wasn't an essay, it was a map, outlining blind spots, suggesting clear corrections, and proposing alternative phrasing for clarity and enforcement. When Clara typed the final sentence and hit save, the clock read 4:56 a.m. Outside the window, the city still slept beneath a soft veil of night. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, then smiled. Exhausted but unbroken. She hadn't just written a report. She'd rewritten her own right to exist in that room. 3 days after submitting her analysis, Clara heard nothing. No emails, no meetings. But deep inside, something shifted. For the first time since she'd arrived at Astor Capital, she no longer felt invisible. Then came Monday. A silver luxury car pulled up outside the tower. Heels clicked against marble. A woman walked through the lobby as if she owned the place. Ava Sinclair, renowned legal strategist and Marcus Wynn's ex. Clara had only heard the whispers, that Ava was razor-sharp, dangerously poised, and used to operate behind the scenes of Astor Capital's biggest deals. She'd left 3 years ago under a cloud of strategic differences. Now she was back, and reinstated as senior legal counsel, leading the Norovia merger. Clara was summoned to floor 66 with the analysis team to present recent findings. Her nerves hadn't settled since that late night. Ava sat at the head of the table, posture perfect, eyes like scalpels. As Clara explained the risks in Clause 9.4c, Ava smiled slightly, an expression that never reached her eyes. Impressive analysis, Ava said, especially for an intern. Clara nodded calmly. I only did what was necessary. But here's the thing, Ava continued. Analysis without understanding the bigger strategy is like peeking through a keyhole and thinking you've seen the whole room. Soft laughter stirred around the room. Clara could feel the energy shifting, everyone tilting toward Ava like compass needles responding to a stronger magnet. After the meeting, Ava approached Clara in the hallway. Read, right? She asked with a perfectly staged smile. You're doing great, but be careful. touching the wrong levers in a place like this, and people don't always get a chance to apologize. Clara stood still, pulse pounding. That wasn't advice, it was a warning. Days later, things began to unravel. Assigned documents showed up out of order. Reports accidentally disappeared. A small typo got flagged as lack of professionalism. Then, on a quiet Friday afternoon, Clara received a curt email from legal. Clara Reed to report directly to Ava Sinclair effective next week. Clara stared at the screen. Ava wasn't just back. She was tightening the noose. The following Wednesday, Clara walked into the office with her usual coffee mug and a quiet smile. Despite the increasing tension with Ava, she still believed that as long as she did her job right, no one could bring her down. She was wrong. At 10:15 a.m., an emergency meeting was called. Every mid-level and senior team member on the Neurovia project was summoned. Clara was told to report to floor 66, and the lights somehow felt colder than usual. Marcus Wynn stood at the front, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Ava held a folder in her hand. She spoke first, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "We've discovered that a confidential document related to Neurovia's system architecture was leaked externally." Ava paused, holding up a printout. "The trace leads back to an internal account belonging to Clara Reed." The room froze. Clara's pulse stopped. "No," she whispered. "Do you have anything to say?" Marcus asked, his tone not cold this time, just hollow. Clara stood. Her voice trembled but remained firm. "I never had access to that file. I didn't even know it existed. Someone used my credentials. This is a setup." Ava sighed, shaking her head slightly. "That's exactly what anyone would say when caught." Clara turned to Marcus, searching his face for a flicker of trust, but he remained still. "Reed," he finally said after a long pause, his voice tight. "I want to believe you." His gaze wavered, just for a second, but then he shut it down. "But I can't ignore what's in front of me." He turned to HR. "Escort her out. I'll review the rest personally." Clara felt her body go numb. No tears, no yelling, just an aching, hollow quiet. She walked out of the boardroom in silence, eyes trailing behind her but no one meeting her gaze. That afternoon, Clara packed her things. Greg passed by, smirking without shame. "Told ya, Ava doesn't play fair." Clara didn't answer. She placed her ID badge on the desk and turned toward the elevator. Each step out of Astor Capital tore through the hope she had built for months. She had believed in truth. She had believed in Marcus. 3 days after Clara's termination, Marcus sat alone in his 70th floor office, the lights of the city reflected in the glass like shattered stars. He read the IT department's report, fists clenched. Everything was clear now. The IP had been spoofed, the document routed through a proxy, and the access originated from a senior-level admin device. Not Clara. It was Ava. As soon as the findings were confirmed, Marcus called an emergency meeting. Within the hour, Ava Sinclair was suspended and locked out of the system. She didn't deny it, just smiled, eyes glinting with malice. "Still soft for the intern in the second-hand suit," she said. Marcus said nothing. That afternoon, in a rare public address, Marcus Wynn, the man known for never flinching, stood before a wall of cameras, voice low and steady. "Clara Reed did nothing wrong. She was framed, and I believed the wrong person." But Clara wasn't there to hear it. She had left the city the very morning after she was fired. Her apartment was empty, her phone disconnected, her email silent. Marcus stood by the window, eyes scanning the skyline, as if searching for her shadow in the clouds. For the first time in his life, the CEO of a financial empire felt powerless. Because this time, truth had come too late. A week after the press conference, Marcus Wynn still hadn't slept a full night. Work piled up, the market fluctuated, but only one thing haunted him: finding Clara. He'd had his team reach out to every email, university, hospital, and volunteer center Clara had ever mentioned. The responses were always the same. No one knew where she was. Until James, his assistant, found a faint clue, an old student interview. In it, Clara had said, "I used to teach at a tiny community center in the suburbs. That place reminded me why I wanted to be a lawyer, to protect people who have no voice." Marcus didn't hesitate. He drove 2 hours through misty farmlands and quiet roads. The center was a run-down white building, its playground overtaken by weeds. As he stepped inside, a few children turned. One boy whispered, "That guy looks weird. He's not from around here." Then he saw her. Clara stood at the whiteboard, wearing a simple button-down, hair tied back. She was explaining how to divide 12 apples among 4 people. Her voice was warm and patient. When their eyes met, the chalk slipped from her hand. Outside the classroom, Clara pulled Marcus into the hallway, her voice colder than Astor Capital's 70th floor. "What are you doing here?" Marcus took a breath. "To apologize. And to tell you, you were right. Ava faked everything. I fired her, I canceled the deal, and I told the truth. To the world." Clara turned her face away. "You apologized in a press room." "Not to me. When I needed you, you didn't believe me." She walked back into the classroom, leaving Marcus alone in the hallway. He had found her, but he hadn't won her back. Marcus didn't leave after that first conversation. He returned to the center every day, sometimes with sandwiches for lunch, sometimes with a stack of children's books he admitted he picked based on the colors. Clara didn't stop him. She didn't welcome him either. But he stayed, patient, as if time was the only thing he still owned. On day 3, he repainted the rusted front gate. On day 5, he fixed a leaking faucet in the restroom, earning applause from the kids like he was a hero. On day 7, he sat on the playground bench, learning every child's name, getting them wrong 3 times, before finally getting one right. Each time Clara smiled, even just slightly, Marcus smiled too, silently, gratefully, like it was fuel enough to keep him going. One afternoon, under the soft golden light, Marcus placed a folded note on the stone bench where Clara often sat. It wasn't a contract, not a justification, just 3 handwritten lines. "You don't have to forgive me today. Just know, I'm not going anywhere, and I never stopped believing you." Clara read it and folded it gently. "You think a piece of paper can fix everything?" she asked, her tone lighter now, no longer sharp but still guarded. "No," Marcus replied, "but it's the only thing I know how to write with honesty." They sat side by side in silence, neither rushing the moment. And in that quiet, though forgiveness hadn't come yet, Clara didn't walk away. That in itself was a beginning. 3 weeks later, Clara walked back into the lobby of Astor Capital, this time in a perfectly tailored suit, calm eyes, shoulders squared. She wasn't returning because she'd been begged or for prestige. She came back for herself, because now every term in the contract was rewritten by her. She was senior legal counsel with full oversight of the company's ethics and data protection policies. That afternoon, just as she wrapped her first leadership meeting, Marcus stepped into the middle of the office. No folders, no laptop, just a small bouquet and a steady gaze. In front of a stunned room, he said, "Clara Reed," Marcus said, voice unwavering. "I've negotiated empires, drafted contracts that shaped entire industries. But this is the only agreement I've ever truly meant." He held out his hand, empty, unguarded. "No clauses, no backup plan, just me asking you. Stay, not at a store, with me." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I never needed a contract," she whispered. "I just needed to believe it was real, and now I do." And right there, among quiet applause and beaming smiles, Marcus took her hand. It wasn't just a return, it was a new beginning.